It's time we talk about hops. Hops are one of the essential ingredients of beer. There was a German law passed back in the 1500s, 1516, called the Reinheitsgebot. And it determined the ingredients that could go into beer. And it was limited to water, barley, and hops. Likewise, England had laws around beer as well. There were laws around what ingredients you could use. There were laws around what you could charge. And that was because of the value of grains at the time. So grains were used, remember that horses were used to get around England and to transport goods. So grains were valuable for the horses, but they were also needed to make beer. So there was a bit of an attempt by the British government, by the British Parliament, to regulate what you could charge and regulate the cost of those ingredients as well, so that you were able to produce. So beer hasn't always had hops in it though. Beer has always had hops in it. Precursors to beer, such as the Old English ales and other concoctions that were invented by other civilizations, they didn't have hops in them. So hops were a really recent innovation. The ancient Sumerians 10,000 years ago were making an alcoholic beverage from a baked bread made from grain. They didn't realize at the time what the contribution from yeast was. Yeast is pretty much everywhere. Yeast is all around us. But they were making this ancient form of beer, very cloudy, and it would spoil fairly quickly. So it had to be made regularly, and it had to be consumed quickly. Early European concoctions had different herbs in them, and those herbs would have somewhat preservative effects in some cases, not always, not nearly as effective as hops. But they'd also use medicinal herbs, so they could put these medicinal herbs into beer to regulate sore stomachs or fevers or things like that. Different herbs that they knew could have medicinal effects would go into the beers. Now, the beer tradition, up until very recently, up until industrialization, beer was a staple part of the diet. In agrarian economies, people out in the field, they need the energy, and beer does have energy in it. The yeast don't consume all of the sugars or all of the carbohydrates, but you also need a safe water source, and the safest water source is one that's brewed and has alcohol in it, because alcohol is antimicrobial as well. Once hops were discovered and once their value in the beer making process was recognized, it allowed those brewers to make beers that were more shelf stable, that could last longer on the shelves. And that's how hops became so popular. Along with that, different varieties of hops can impart different flavors and different bittering effects. So depending on what style of beer you like, there are hops out there for every style of beer available, imaginable. And when you think about it, hops go with beer hops go with beer. Or another way of saying it would be like beer needs hops, like ice needs whiskey. Birds need beers and ice needs whiskey. Hops were originally used to preserve beer, and that preserving effect comes around from what's called isomerization of the alpha acids that are contained in the hops. Early adopters, there are stories, and I'm not sure how truthful or how apocryphal they are, that IPAs were developed by adding additional hops into them to extend the shelf life of the beer when it was shipped to India, hence the name India Pale Ale. There are some camps that say that, yeah, that's the absolute truth. There are other camps that say, no, that's just a story. I don't know, I'm not a historian, but it sounds reasonable. And as I said, in an agrarian economy, you need a safe source of water, and beer was seen as being a safe source of water. Different types of beers were brewed for different occasions. You've got the situation in Belgium where saisons were brewed, and the better the beer you could brew, the better the quality of worker you would attract to your farm during those, for those seasonal workers. You also have the situation with people working out in the fields. During the day, they would be drinking a beer that was, say, 1 or 2% alcohol, and that's so that they didn't get too drunk while they were out tilling the field. But at night time, they would have a stronger table strength beer, a 4 or 5 or 6%. And the way they were brewed is that you do 2 runnings on the same batch of barley. So your first runnings would be your table strength beer. That's where most of the sugars are extracted from the grain. And then once you've taken the wort off the grain, you would then reuse it. You'd reuse that grain. You just pour more water in there. So most of your sugars are already converted. You don't need to do a long mash for a second running beer. You just need to extract those sugars that have already been converted. And you do that just by sparging. So you run water through it, or you can teabag it, or you can do whatever you like. You can just give it a good old stir. And then extract the water from that, and that would give you your weaker 1 to 2% field beer. But in order to preserve them and to stop them going off while people are out in the field, remember, out in the heat, things tend to go off even quicker, you use hops. Okay, the hop plant itself, its botanical name is Humulus lupus. It's not a vine. A lot of people think, or they call it the hop vine. It's not. The official term is a bine. So vines send out tendrils that hook onto structures to support the vine and support the weight of the fruit on it. Things like passion fruit, that's a vine. Pumpkin's a vine. Cucumbers are a vine. And we've got a couple of vines growing here at the moment. So obviously I have hops. At the moment, I have Cascade. Do I? No, I have Cluster. And I have Victoria, not to be confused with Vic Secret. I also have a plant out there that's sometimes called climbing spinach. Its proper name is Malabar, and it does the same thing that hops do, which is it wraps the entire stalk around the support structure. So you put a piece of string up. In the case of hops in commercial farms, those strings will be extended up 4 meters, and the vine will grow around that piece of string. When it comes time to flower and the flowering is complete, they come along, they just cut those strings down and take them away for processing. The other thing about hops is that they're a rhizome. They don't have a deep root structure. What they have is a horizontal root, and then those vines shoot up off that horizontal root. When you're training vines, so the way that I do it is I've got the rhizome in the ground. I've got a piece of string that's tethered to the ground, and that comes up in a V. So there's two lengths of string that come up. Now mine only go about 2.5, 3 meters, but that's because I've got young hop varieties that they haven't matured, and they're not going to do that much. Their growth isn't going to be that great in the first year. But what you do is you take the 2 most promising vines when they start to shoot, and you wrap those around your string in a clockwise manner, and you keep trimming the rest of the vines off. They will keep reshooting, so you need to trim them off. The reason you trim them off is you don't want the plant putting all its energy into growing new bines. You want the plant to put its energy into extending the bines that you've got and into the hop flower. Now, the other interesting thing about the hop is it is, as most plants are, it's a sexual plant. It has a male and a female, but we're only interested in the female because it's the female that grows the hop cones. The hop cone is equivalent to the hop's flower. So the male doesn't grow hops at all. Males are still useful because when they're developing new hop varieties, they need to cross-pollinate the male with a female to encourage certain attributes of that new hop variety, whether you're going for something like a super alpha acid where you're getting alpha acids of 14, 15%, or whether you're going for a new flavour, you want to get in, a cherry flavour into your hops. You might have selected for those flavours starting to come through and you reproduce with a male plant, because if you just take a cutting of a female and grow that, you're just getting the same genetics in that new plant. So by cross-pollinating with the males, you're getting new genetics coming in to affect the attributes of that plant. There are hundreds of different styles or varieties of hops these days. Everything from, I've got lists of them here in the index. Everything from Amarillo through to Zappa. So you've got an A to Z of hops. And they are bred for different reasons, obviously. Some of them are high alpha acid. You've got your old world or noble hops. They're your original hops that would have been around pre-1900s. So things like Magnum, Fuggle, East Kent Golding, they're your old world hops. They're mostly used for bittering. Then you get your new world hops, your Citras, your Cascades, your Superdelics. And they're bred specifically for the flavours and aromas that you get. And they're done through massive breeding programs that can take 10 or 20 years to develop a certain style of hop. So these hop breeders really have to be far, futuristic looking. When they started developing Cascade, nobody was using Cascade. They needed somebody to take Cascade up, and the major breweries didn't want it because the commercial beers are nothing like craft beers. There was no craft industry around at the time Cascade was developed. So it was the craft beer industry that actually launched Cascade, and Cascade helped to launch the craft beer industry. Two things coming together at exactly the right time. Let's take a quick look at plant anatomy. Now, I am going to read this because I don't want to get anything wrong. I'm not a botanist. So the different parts of the hop cone itself, of the hop itself, specifically the cone. So the cone itself is bud-like. As I said before, it's the flower part of the cone. And you only get it from the female. The strig is the stalky bit that attaches the cone to the vine, and it's full of tannins. So if you want to impart tannins and mouthfeel without astringency, because if you extract tannins from grain, you do get astringency, then you could potentially do that by leaving the strig on the cone. The bract are the protective covering of leaves that are over the outside of the hop cone. Bracteoles are the soft base of the bract, and that's where the lupulin glands are, and the lupulin glands are what we're interested in. The lupulin glands themselves are a yellowish gold structure. They contain the resins, the essential oils, and the alpha and beta acids. There are different ways that you can use hops. So I've got hops growing at the moment. They're just about ready for picking. Once I've picked them, if I want to use them as a fresh hop or a wet hop, they have to be used within 24 to 48 hours. And the reason is that they do deteriorate very quickly. They will decay the same as any other plant once you've cut it. You can use dried hops. So you can take those hop cones and put them in a kiln or a dehydrator and just extract all of the moisture from them. And once that moisture is extracted from them, you leave the oils behind, but they last a lot longer than that. They're more shelf stable. You get pellet hops. So pellet hops are the most common form of hops that you will get at your brew store. So what they've done is they've taken that hop cone, they've extracted as much of the vegetal matter as they can, and they compress that into a pellet. What the most common form of hop pellet is the T90, and that means it's 90% vegetal matter, 10% lupulin. There are other forms, but the processes to extract any more of the vegetal matter increases the cost of processing, increases the cost of the hop itself. There is a recent innovation, I'm not sure how recent exactly, like in the last 5 years or so, which is cryo hops. They use a cryogenic process, freezing, to extract the lupulin glands from the vegetal matter. And that produces a higher concentration of alpha acids. So a citra, for example, might go from being a 12% citra to a 24% citra. And the final version that I'm aware of with hops is the hop shot. Now, I haven't seen them available in Australia. I don't know if they are available in Australia or New Zealand, but basically you get a liquid form of the hop, you get a syringe, you extract what you want, and you inject that liquid straight into your wort. I haven't used it. I've heard good things about it. It's obviously going to completely eliminate that vegetal component of the hop, which means if you're dry hopping, you can dry hop for longer to extract more of those essential oils, or to integrate more of those essential oils into your beer. The problem with dry hopping is that if you leave the wort or the beer on that dry hop for too long, then you're going to impart some vegetal flavors onto the beer. Some grassiness, some hay-like flavors, which are obviously undesirable. So most people who are dry hopping will only leave the beer on the dry hop for 2, maybe 3 days. Obviously the hop shot gets around that because you're not introducing that vegetal matter in the first place. Now again, I'm going to refer to my notes here because I'm not a chemist either. The chemistry of hops is fairly simple. What we're interested in mostly are the alpha acids and the cohumulones. So the alpha acids determine the bittering effect of the hop. And you get that bittering effect by isomerizing it when you boil it. So basically you're changing it, the structure of the alpha acid by isomerization from one form to another form. And then that alpha acid gives you the bitterness that you perceive in beer, but it also gives you those antimicrobial properties that can help to preserve beer. You get beta acids. So the beta acid in hops has mostly a preserving effect. So you can't isomerize a beta acid. So it's giving you some preservation. For beers that have a long storage requirement, sometimes those beta acids can come across as oxidization or oxidized flavors. You also get essential oils. Now the essential oils are what a lot of the craft brewers are interested in these days. So bittering hops have been around forever. We know how to use them. We know what effects they give you, whether it's East Kent Golding or Magnum or whatever it is that you're using as a bittering hop. A lot of the differentiation between beers these days are in the flavor hops and the aroma hops that they use, and how they're combined to give different effects. So the essential oils are fairly volatile. They will be evaporated in the boil, which is why you add them at the end of the boil, either in the last 15 minutes or at flame out or in a hop stand. You can also use them in a dry hop to get to pack extra punch in there. Now that's the end of the informational section. about hops. One thing I will say is go out and get yourself some reading material on hops. I just realised I'm holding up the wrong side of the book. Get yourself some reading material. This is the most useful book that I've found to date on hops. It takes you through the chemistry of the hops, the history of hops, different hop varieties, different uses of hops, growing regions, how you add hops to the beer, whether it's a first wort, a boil, a hop stand, a dry hop. And then it goes through all the different styles of hops or variety of hops, or not all of them, obviously, there are hundreds, but that goes through a lot of different varieties of hops. So it goes from Amarillo to Zappa and everything in between. You've got your Citras, you've got your Cascades, you've got your Fuggles, your Galaxies, your Mosaics, your Mochuecas, Nelson Salvin, Pacific Sunrise, Pearl, Ruwaka. So there's a lot of different hops in here. It's not just American hops. There are Australian hops in here, Vic's Secret. There are Galaxy is in here. You've got your New Zealand hops in here as well. So it's not just American hops. It's not just European hops. It is a whole variety of them. When you're looking at a hop, if you're going to use a hop for the first time, read up on it. Find out how it was developed, why it was developed, what it's used for. This book will tell you the type of hop it is, whether it's a proprietary hop, so whether somebody owns the patent on it, what sensory effects it gives you, the acid breakdowns, alpha, beta, and cohumulone, the oils, so the concentration of oils, how it's used, whether it's a dual use hop, whether it's mostly used for bittering, whether it's mostly used for aroma and flavour. And examples of what you can taste it in. So Citra, for example, they list Parish Brewing's Ghost in the Machine Double IPA. You also get a picture of the hop. So Citra looks like that. If we go back to one of my other favourite hops, Cascade, looks like that. You might say, oh, it's the same. Not quite. There is a different structure, slightly different structure if you know what you're looking for. But again, with Cascade, it gives you all of that information. It tells you that you can taste it in the world's OG, and that's Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and that's a beer that I love brewing. It will then tell you about the style of beer that you can use it in. So for example, Cascade, the most common style it's used in is in American Pale Ales. And it gives you the stats of that style. So, you know, the IBUs, the SRMs, the ABV. Sorry about throwing all these acronyms out. You should know them by now. The mouthfeel, the carbonation, the serving temperature, sensory impacts, and what glassware to use. And then it will give you some of the history as well. So Sierra Nevada Brewing Company is covered here. And it tells you about Sierra Nevada and Ken Grossman and how he developed the pale ale and how he still makes it true to form today. And it's not just a quick blurb, it's 4 pages. Let's see if I can see something that looks slightly different. Oh, Vic's Secret, another hop that I use quite often. You can see is definitely longer and slenderer than either Citra or Cascade. Books, I've said it before and I'll say it again, books are invaluable. They're an invaluable resource. People don't read nearly enough today. They go onto the internet and they find a recipe and they just bung it all together without understanding what the ingredients are doing. You can do that, but it's a little like plagiarism. Okay, the final section that we're going to cover is how you get hops and how you store hops. So hops generally come, these are hops that I've used on the weekend. They generally come in packs like this. You can get them in packs as small as 50 grams or you can go up to 500 gram packs, depending on how much of it you're going to use. When I'm storing them in the fridge, I always store a rubber band around them just to try and keep as much air out of them as possible and keep moisture out of them. Ah, Nectaron, that's beautiful. So this is the hop pellet itself, if you haven't seen them before. That's the hop pellet. I'm not sure where the, oh yeah, there's the camera. So that's what the pellets look like. Sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're shorter. I tend to find that cryo pellets are short nuggety pellets. When you order hops from your brewing supplies store, that's generally how they'll come. If you're buying so the very first time I bought hops to put into, I think it was the very first all grain beer I did. It was a brown ale. I went to the brewing supply store and I only needed 10 grams. I wasn't planning on getting into brewing like I am now. I was just doing it on a very small scale. I was just doing it a single batch just for something to do and just to see what the difference was between extract and all grain. So I went and bought my 10 grams and it came in a little plastic Ziploc bag. And the reason being was that I didn't need 50 grams. I just wanted what I needed for that batch. These days, this is a 250 gram bag. I'd buy most of my hops in this. This is Pacific Jade. I bought this specifically for a New Zealand Pilsner. I'm not sure when I'm going to use that again, so I only bought a 50 gram bag for that. I do like what it does to the beer though. So different hops have different smells. So 2 completely different hops here. The beer that I was brewing on the weekend used Magnum for bittering, Nectaron and Pacific Jade for aroma and flavour. And you can smell the difference in them. Magnum is very earthy, very dank, whereas you get Nectaron, oh my God. You would swear there was a peach in there. Oh, absolutely beautiful. Okay, you don't want to store your hops long term like that. I've had them in the fridge like that. I opened them on the weekend. Today's Wednesday, so it's time to tidy up, have a bit of a tidy up and get them into my long-term storage solution, which is, I don't know if you can see, oh yeah, you can see it. A vacuum sealer and some vacuum bags. So when I get hops, that wasn't cut very straight. First thing I do, seal the end of the bag. It's an old vacuum sealer. It doesn't work particularly well. And what I'll do, I won't just do a single seal on that. I will do a double seal. Turn it over so that it sits a bit nicer. It's an old machine, it doesn't quite hold down properly. It's time to get a new one. Okay, so that's sealed twice at the base. Then I will get my pen and I'll write on there what it is. It's Nectaron. And it is 9.1% AA. When I'm cutting the length of this bag, I'll cut twice as much as I need. Maybe even more, depending on the size of the bag that's going in there. And the reason for that is that if in a couple of weeks I need to get the Nectaron out, I'm not going to have to create a completely new bag. I can just cut the top off here where I've sealed it, and once I've used the hops, put them back in, reseal again. So I'm not going to all the trouble of creating new bags every time. So once it's ready, we put the end of the bag into the vacuum section. We turn on vac and seal, and after all that, we have a sealed bag of hops that's labeled. So if I can't see the label on the inside, I know exactly what it is. And this will now go into a large container that goes into my chest freezer. And it's quite safe to freeze hops. They keep better if they're frozen. So yeah, if you've got a vacuum sealer, do this. If you don't have a vacuum sealer, then you can just put them into a Ziploc bag, get as much of the air out as you can, and then put them into the freezer. For me, it looks like it's time to get a new vacuum sealer because this one hasn't sealed quite as well as I would have liked it to. But that's it. That's the episode on hops. There are a lot of hops to explore. If you look at the website backyardbrewer.com.au, there is a lot of information on there on 3 specific varieties of hops as well, and I'll be putting more up in the coming weeks. There's also there's a link there to a couple of podcasts. If you want to listen to the information rather than read it, you can listen to it while you're driving, for example. That's the end of the episode, and I would like to thank our first Patreon, Bill, for signing up. Patreon is available. It's patreon.com/backyardbrewer. There'll be a link in the description below. If you would like to contribute to the channel, we really appreciate it. Most of the content will still be coming out on YouTube, all of the grain to glass, all of the sort of information on hops and yeasts and all of that stuff that I'll be covering will still be on YouTube, but there'll be extras on there for the Patreon community, like some behind the scenes teasers, some information on what's going on in the brewery, some updates, some previews of new equipment, even some previews of rough cuts of shows potentially as well. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button, click the notification icon and select all so you get informed when we have new episodes coming out. Let YouTube know that you like this content, that you find it valuable by clicking the like button. And remember, enjoy the hobby, learn lots,